The unexpected alliance. The sky above the barren planet was a swirling mix of red and gold, an eerie reminder of the chaos that had spread across the galaxy. Commander Jace Hunter adjusted his helmet, scanning the rocky terrain below as his ship descended. This was not the kind of mission he was used to. As one of humanity's top warriors, he thrived in combat, not in treasure hunts. Yet, the orders were clear. Retrieve the artifact hidden on this uncharted planet and return to base. The artifact, they said, was the key to turning the tide in the Galactic War. No one knew exactly what it did, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Jace stepped out of the ship, his boots crunching against the dry ground. The air was thin but breathable, the wind carrying a faint metallic smell. His scanner beeped softly, pointing him toward a cluster of ruins in the distance. "Piece of cake," he muttered, gripping his plasma rifle tightly. But as he approached the ruins, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He wasn't alone. From the shadows of a crumbled wall, a figure emerged. She was tall and graceful, her pale blue skin shimmering under the alien sun. Her silver eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jace froze. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, a warrior from a species humanity had been fighting for decades. "Stop right there, human," she said, her voice cold and commanding. Jace raised his rifle instinctively. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The alien didn't flinch. Instead, she held up a sleek blade, its edges glowing faintly. "I could ask you the same. This place belongs to my people. You have no right to be here." Jace narrowed his eyes. "Your people? Last I checked, your kind was busy trying to wipe us out." The alien's expression hardened. "And your kind is no different. Always destroying, always taking. But this," she gestured toward the ruins, "is something neither of us can claim alone." Jace's grip on his rifle tightened. "What are you talking about?" "The artifact," she said, stepping closer. "It's not just a weapon. It's a key, a piece of a prophecy older than either of our civilizations. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy everything." Jace scoffed. "Prophecies sounds like alien mumbo-jumbo to me. And arrogance sounds like humanity's greatest flaw," she shot back. Before Jace could respond, his scanner beeped frantically. His heart sank as he saw several red dots closing in on their position. "Enemy drones." "Great," Jace muttered. "This is just what I needed." The alien warrior glanced at the scanner, her eyes narrowing. "They're tracking the artifact's signal. If we don't move now, we'll both be dead." Jace hesitated. Trusting an enemy went against every instinct he had, but the drones were closing in fast, and he wasn't equipped to take them all on alone. "Fine," he said, lowering his rifle slightly. "But if you try anything, I won't hesitate to put you down." The alien smirked. "Likewise, human." Together, they sprinted toward the ruins, the sound of approaching drones growing louder. The ground shook as the first blast hit, sending debris flying. Jace dove behind a stone pillar, firing at the drones with precision. The alien moved with agility, her blade slicing through the machines like a hot knife through butter. "Nice moves," Jace called out, reloading his rifle. She didn't reply, her focus entirely on the battle. In a matter of minutes, the drones were reduced to smoking scraps, but there was no time to celebrate. More were surely on the way. "We need to find the artifact," the alien said, her tone urgent. "Now." Jace nodded, following her deeper into the ruins. The architecture was ancient, unlike anything he had seen before. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly as they passed. The scanner beeped again, directing them to a large chamber at the heart of the ruins. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, "The truth," the alien said, her expression grave. "Our war is just the beginning. Something far worse is coming, and if we don't work together, neither of our species will survive." Jace stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't trust her, not yet, but for the first time, He wondered if maybe, just maybe, humanity's survival depended on more than just defeating its enemies. Maybe it required an alliance. And that thought, as unsettling as it was, marked the beginning of an unexpected partnership that would change the galaxy forever. The artifact's secrets. The artifact pulsed faintly in Jace's hands, its golden glow casting eerie patterns on the chamber walls. It wasn't heavy, but it felt alive, as if it was watching him. For a moment, he considered putting it back, but the alien warrior, Nissa, stepped closer, her silver eyes gleaming with urgency. "Don't drop it," she warned, her tone sharp. "That thing could level this entire planet if handled wrong." Jace shot her a glare. "Thanks for the pep talk." Before either of them could speak further, the ground beneath them trembled. A deep rumble echoed through the ruins, and chunks of stone began to fall from the ceiling. "What now?" Jace muttered, clutching the artifact tightly. Nissa turned her head toward the entrance, her sharp features tense. The artifact activated a defense mechanism. "This place is collapsing. We need to move. Now." Jace followed her as she darted through the crumbling hallways, her movements swift and precise. He was impressed, even if he didn't want to admit it. She moved like a shadow, dodging falling debris and leaping over obstacles with an ease that made him feel clunky in comparison. As they emerged into the open air, the ruins behind them caved in with a deafening crash. Dust filled the sky, turning the alien sun into a faint blur. "Well, that was close," Jace said, coughing as he brushed debris off his armor. Nissa didn't respond. Instead, she was staring at the artifact, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" Jace asked. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "The artifact. It's waking up." Before Jace could question her, the artifact in his hands flared brightly. He felt a jolt, like an electric current running through his body. His vision blurred, and then everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't on the planet anymore. Instead, he stood in a vast, empty void, the stars stretching infinitely around him. In the distance, he could see massive shadowy figures moving, giants of unimaginable scale. They seemed ancient, their forms crackling with energy. A voice boomed, deep and resonant, echoing in his mind. "You are not ready." Jace stumbled back, his heart racing. Ready for what? The voice ignored his question. Instead, the shadows shifted, showing him flashes of destruction, entire planets reduced to ash, civilizations torn apart, and a darkness spreading across the galaxy like a plague. The key lies in unity. But unity comes with a price. Jace felt a sharp pain in his chest, and suddenly, he was back on the planet, the artifact still glowing in his hands. He gasped for air, his knees buckling. Nissa caught him before he hit the ground. "What did you see?" Something bad," Jace managed to say between breaths. "A warning. Destruction. Something's coming." Nissa's expression darkened. "The prophecy. It's starting." Jace glared at her. "Enough with the prophecy. Tell me what this thing really is." Nissa took a step back, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. "It's more than a weapon. It's a memory, a guide. It shows the future to those strong enough to wield it." "And what's the future?" Jace asked, his voice laced with frustration. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "The future is war. Not between our people, but against something neither of us can face alone." Jace shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't care what you believe," Nissa snapped. "But if we don't figure out how to use that artifact, none of us will survive." Before Jace could argue, his scanner beeped again. The red dots were back, closing in fast. Enemy reinforcements. "Perfect," Jace muttered, his grip tightening on the artifact. "Just what I needed." Nissa drew her blade, her posture shifting into a combat stance. "You fight like a brute. Let me handle this." Jace smirked, raising his rifle. "You stick with your shiny sword, and I'll do the real work." The two of them stood back to back as the first wave of drones descended upon them, their metallic forms gleaming in the sunlight. Plasma bolts lit up the air as Jace fired with precision, while Nessa moved like a storm, her blade cutting through the machines effortlessly. For a brief moment, they worked as a seamless unit, each move complementing the others. But the sheer number of drones was overwhelming, and they were quickly running out of room to maneuver. "Any bright ideas?" Jace shouted, blasting a drone out of the sky. Nissa hesitated, then glanced at the artifact. "Give it to me." "What? Are you insane?" "Trust me," she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "I can activate its power. It's the only way." Jace hesitated, every instinct telling him not to trust her. But as another wave of drones closed in, he made a split-second decision and tossed her the artifact. Nissa caught it and closed her eyes. The artifact's glow intensified, and a wave of energy erupted from it, knocking the drones out of the sky in a single blinding pulse. When the dust settled, Nissa stood there, her hands trembling as she cradled the now dim artifact. Jace stared at her, his rifle lowered. What the hell just happened? Nissa looked up at him, her expression grave. "I saved us, but now they'll know where we are. And they'll send something worse." "Who's they?" Jace asked, his voice edged with frustration. Nissa's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "The ones who created the artifact. The ones who want it back." Jace clenched his fists, realizing the stakes were far higher than he'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about the Galactic War anymore. This was about survival. And the fight was only beginning. Betrayal or trust. The silence of the barren planet was unnerving, broken only by the faint hum of the artifact as Jace secured it in his pack. He cast a wary glance at Nissa, who was standing at the edge of the cliff overlooking the valley below. Her posture was rigid, her silver eyes scanning the horizon for threats. "You've been awfully quiet since that big save the galaxy moment," Jace said, his voice cutting through the stillness. Nissa didn't look at him. "Quiet is necessary when you don't know who to trust." Jace smirked, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "If that's supposed to be a jab at me, try harder. I'm the one who should be worried. You aliens aren't exactly known for your teamwork." She turned to him sharply, her gaze like ice. "And humans are known for their loyalty. Spare me." Jace opened his mouth to retort, but his scanner beeped, pulling his attention away. A single red dot blinked steadily on the screen. His jaw tightened. "We've got company," he said. Nissa moved to his side, her hand resting on her blade. "Just one. That's odd." Jace's instincts screamed at him to stay alert. He adjusted the scanner settings, but the dot remained solitary. That was unusual. The drones usually moved in packs. "Could be a scout," he muttered. "Or a trap." Nissa's voice was calm but firm. "We should move. Staying here makes us an easy target." Jace nodded, and they began descending the rocky terrain toward a narrow canyon. The air grew cooler as they walked, the towering walls on either side casting long shadows. It was the perfect place for an ambush, and Jace's grip on his rifle tightened with every step. "Tell me something," Jace said, breaking the tension. "If this artifact is so important to your people, why didn't you take it and run back to your fleet?" Nissa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder at him, her expression unreadable. "Do you think I haven't considered it?" "That's comforting," Jace replied dryly. "I didn't," she continued, her tone sharp, "because the artifact doesn't choose sides. It only responds to those who understand its purpose. And that's supposed to be us." Jace scoffed. "Last I checked, humans and your kind are great at shooting each other, not saving galaxies." Nissa stopped abruptly, her blade drawn in a flash. Jace followed her gaze to a figure emerging from the shadows ahead. It was another human, dressed in the dark combat gear of the Galactic fleet. "Commander Hunter," the figure said, lowering their weapon. "It's about time we found you." Jace froze. Something about this didn't feel right. The soldier's voice was familiar, but their movements were too relaxed, too casual for someone who had supposedly been tracking him. "What are you doing here?" Jace asked, keeping his rifle steady. The soldier stepped closer, hands raised. "I was sent to retrieve you. HQ got your distress signal and—" "I didn't send a signal," Jace interrupted, his eyes narrowing. The soldier hesitated, then smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that sent chills down Jace's spine. Nissa's grip tightened on her blade. "This is a trap." The soldier's smile widened as they reached into their gear and pulled out a small device. "It's not personal, Commander. You just have something my employers want." Jace's mind raced. He knew it. The artifact wasn't just a weapon or a key. It was a prize that everyone, even his own people, was willing to kill for. Before he could react, the device emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound. Jace winced as his scanner went haywire, the screen flooding with dozens of red dots. "Back up," the soldier said casually. "And they'll be here any minute." Jace raised his rifle, aiming at the soldier's chest. "Turn it off. Now." The soldier chuckled. "You won't shoot me. You need answers." Jace's finger hovered over the trigger, his anger rising. But before he could decide, Nissa moved like a flash of lightning, her blade slicing through the device in the soldier's hand. Sparks flew as the device shattered, and the soldier stumbled back in shock. "That was stupid," the soldier growled, reaching for their weapon. Jace didn't hesitate this time. A single shot from his rifle sent the soldier sprawling to the ground, unconscious. Nissa looked at him, her expression calm but critical. "You're too slow to act." "I had it under control," Jace snapped, his adrenaline still pumping. Nissa sheathed her blade. "If that's what you call control, it's a miracle you've survived this long." Their argument was cut short by the distant sound of engines. Jace glanced at his scanner. It was still malfunctioning, but the sound of approaching drones was unmistakable. "We're out of time," he said. "We need to move." Nissa nodded, but as they started to run, she paused. "That soldier was one of yours." Jace didn't answer. He didn't need to. The question hung heavy in the air. If his own people were willing to betray him for the artifact, who could he really trust? Nissa watched him for a moment, her gaze softer than before. "Trust is dangerous, human, but it's also the only way we'll survive this." Jace met her eyes, his grip tightening on his rifle. He didn't trust her. He wasn't sure he trusted anyone anymore. But for now, survival came first. Race against time. The sky above was a shifting palette of fiery orange and deep violet, signaling the onset of a storm. Jace Hunter's boots pounded against the rocky ground as he sprinted, the artifact strapped tightly to his back. His lungs burned, but he pushed on, glancing over his shoulder at Nissa, who was keeping pace effortlessly. "We're running blind here," Jace said, his voice sharp with frustration. "Where exactly are we going?" Nissa didn't slow down, her silver eyes locked on the horizon. "There's a vault buried beneath the cliffs ahead. It's one of my people's old strongholds. If the artifact is destabilizing, that's the only place we can contain it." Jace gritted his teeth. "And you're just now mentioning this." "I didn't think we'd need it," Nissa replied coolly. "You humans tend to prefer brute force over strategy." "Yeah, well, brute force is keeping us alive right now," Jace shot back, dodging a jagged outcrop of rock. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder. The enemy drones weren't giving up, and their numbers were increasing. Jace's scanner had finally recovered, and the cluster of red dots on the screen painted a grim picture. "They're gaining on us," he said, adjusting his grip on his rifle. "We can't outrun them forever." Nissa slowed for a moment, pulling a small cylindrical device from her belt. "We won't need to. Keep running." "What are you?" Before Jace could finish, Nissa hurled the device toward the drones. A flash of light erupted behind them, followed by a deafening explosion. The shockwave knocked Jace off balance, but Nissa caught his arm, steadying him. "Now they're delayed," she said, her tone as calm as ever. "Keep moving." Jace shook his head. "Remind me never to underestimate you." The cliffs loomed closer, their jagged edges rising like the teeth of a monstrous beast. Jace could see a faint shimmer in the rock face, an entrance concealed by alien technology. Nissa reached it first, pressing her hand against a barely visible panel. The rock shifted, revealing a narrow passageway that glowed faintly with an eerie blue light. "Inside," she commanded, motioning for Jace to follow. He hesitated for a split second, his instincts screaming at him not to enter a place so obviously designed by her kind. But the sound of engines growing louder left him no choice. The passage sealed behind them as they stepped into the vault. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of old machinery and stale energy. Strange glyphs illuminated the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. "This place is charming," Jace muttered, scanning their surroundings. "You sure it's safe?" Nissa ignored him, moving toward a central console. Her fingers danced across the controls, and the room began to hum with power. In the center of the chamber, a platform rose, surrounded by a shimmering force field. "Place the artifact there," she said, nodding toward the platform. Jace hesitated. "And what happens after that?" Nissa's expression softened, but only slightly. "The vault will stabilize it, but only temporarily. We'll need to decode its energy signature to stop it from triggering a larger event." "Larger event?" Jace's voice rose. "You mean this thing can get worse?" "It's a beacon," Nissa explained. "If it's not contained, it will draw them." "Them again," Jace muttered, shaking his head. "You're really bad at specifics." Nissa sighed. "I don't have time to explain everything. Just trust me." Jace met her gaze, weighing his options. Trusting an alien went against every instinct he had, but he didn't have the luxury of doubt. With a muttered curse, he unstrapped the artifact and placed it on the platform. The room vibrated as the artifact began to pulse, its golden glow intensifying. The glyphs on the walls flared, their patterns shifting like liquid fire. Jace stepped back, his rifle ready, but Nissa held up a hand. "Stay calm," she said. "This is normal." "Normal for you, maybe," Jace muttered. Suddenly, the artifact emitted a sharp, piercing sound. Jace covered his ears, grimacing. The glyphs on the walls began to shift faster, forming symbols that seemed to burn into his vision. "What's happening?" he shouted over the noise. Nissa's eyes widened as she studied the symbols. "It's sending a message." "A message to who?" Jace demanded. Before she could answer, the platform's energy field flickered, and the room fell silent. The glyphs dimmed, leaving the two of them in eerie stillness. Nissa stepped closer to the console, her expression unreadable. "What did it say?" Jace asked, his voice low. Nissa turned to him, her face pale. "It's not a message, it's a warning." Jace's stomach twisted. "For us?" "No," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "For them." The realization hit Jace like a punch to the gut. The artifact wasn't just a key or a weapon. It was bait. And they had just activated it. A sudden rumble shook the vault, and the faint hum of engines filled the air once again. "They found us," Nissa said, drawing her blade. Jace raised his rifle, his jaw tightening. "Then we make sure they regret it." The vault door shuddered as something massive began pounding against it. Jace took a deep breath, steadying his aim. The race against time wasn't over. It was just beginning. The traitor's gambit. The air in the underground vault was heavy, thick with the hum of ancient energy and the tension between Jace and Nissa. The artifact rested on the central platform, its golden light now a dull, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of something vast and unknowable. Jace paced the room, his rifle slung over his shoulder, while Nissa worked feverishly at the console, her fingers gliding over glowing glyphs. The hum of approaching engines above ground was growing louder. The enemy was closing in. "We're sitting ducks down here," Jace muttered, his voice taut with frustration. "How much longer do you need?" Nissa didn't look up. "If you keep distracting me longer." Jace was about to snap back when his comlink crackled to life. A familiar voice, smooth and calm, cut through the static. "Commander Hunter, it's good to hear you're still alive." Jace froze. "Admiral Work." Nissa glanced at him, her silver eyes narrowing. "Who is that?" Jace didn't answer immediately. The Admiral's voice continued, smooth as silk. "We've been tracking your beacon, Commander. We know you've secured the artifact. Stand by for extraction." Jace frowned. Something about Work's tone was off. Too rehearsed. Too eager. "How did you find me?" Jace asked, his hand tightening on the rifle. Work chuckled, the sound tinny through the comlink. "We've had eyes on this mission since the beginning. Your efforts have been commendable, but now it's time to hand over the artifact. Protocols, you understand." Jace exchanged a wary glance with Nissa. She shook her head subtly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Admiral," Jace said cautiously, "this artifact is more dangerous than we thought. We need tow." Work interrupted, his voice sharp. "Enough, Commander. You have your orders. Hold your position." The line went dead, and the vault plunged into an uneasy silence. Nissa was the first to speak. "That man's lying. You know it." Jace ran a hand through his hair, trying to piece everything together. "He's an admiral. He's not supposed to lie." Nissa scoffed, her tone biting. "And you think humans are above betrayal? Open your eyes. He's here for the artifact, not to save you." Jace wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew she was right. Work's sudden appearance, his insistence on taking the artifact, it didn't add up. Before he could respond, the vault door trembled violently. A deep groan echoed through the chamber as cracks formed in the reinforced walls. "They're breaching," Nissa said, drawing her blade. "We need to move." Jace nodded, his mind racing. If Work was here, that meant the Galactic fleet wasn't far behind. And if the Admiral had sold them out, they were in even deeper trouble than he'd thought. The door exploded inward, a cloud of dust and debris filling the room. Jace and Nissa took cover as a squad of heavily armed soldiers stormed in, their sleek black armor bearing the insignia of the Galactic fleet. At their head was Admiral Work himself, his face a mask of calm authority. His dark eyes locked onto Jace immediately. "Commander," Work said, stepping forward, "you've done well. Now, hand over the artifact." Jace stood, his rifle aimed squarely at the Admiral. "You lied to me." Work didn't flinch. "I did what was necessary. That artifact doesn't belong to you. And it doesn't belong to her," he said, gesturing toward Nissa with a sneer. "It belongs to humanity." "Humanity can't control it," Jace shot back. "It's too dangerous." Work's expression darkened. "That's not your decision to make. Stand down, Commander. That's an order." Jace hesitated, his heart pounding. He had followed Work's orders for years, trusted him implicitly. But now, holding the artifact in his hands and seeing the destruction it could unleash, he couldn't obey. "Sorry, Admiral," Jace said, his voice firm. "Not this time." Work sighed, as if disappointed. "Then you leave me no choice." With a wave of his hand, the soldiers opened fire. The room erupted into chaos, plasma bolts ricocheting off the walls. Nissa moved like a shadow, her blade a blur as she deflected shots and took down soldiers with precision. Jace fired back, his rifle aimed at the soldiers' exposed joints, but it was clear they were outnumbered. In the midst of the firefight, Work made his move, darting toward the platform where the artifact lay. Jace saw him and shouted, but it was too late. The Admiral grabbed the artifact, his expression triumphant. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Nissa shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. Work smirked. secured humanity's future. But the artifact began to glow, its light intensifying to a blinding brilliance. Rourke's smirk faltered as cracks appeared along its surface, the golden glow turning a menacing red. "What's happening?" Rourke demanded, his voice laced with panic. "You triggered it," Nyssa said, her tone grim. "And now, it's calling them." The room shuddered violently, and a deep otherworldly hum filled the air. Jace grabbed Nyssa, pulling her behind cover as the artifact released a wave of energy, knocking everyone off their feet. When the light faded, the artifact was gone, and in its place stood a swirling vortex of darkness, pulsating with an unnatural energy. Rourke stared at it in horror. "What is that?" Nyssa's voice was cold. "The end of everything." Jace pulled himself to his feet, his gaze locked on the vortex. He didn't know what it was or what it meant, but one thing was clear: they were out of time. Unity and chaos. The vortex loomed above them, a swirling void of darkness and crimson lightning, crackling with power that made the air itself vibrate. Jace felt its pull, not physical, but something deeper, an instinctive fear clawing at his mind. The artifact was gone, and in its place, this thing now hung like a rift between worlds. Nyssa was the first to break the stunned silence. "We have to close it." Jace glanced at her, his rifle still raised, sweat dripping down his face. "Close it? Do you even know what it is?" "It's a gateway," she replied, her voice steady but grim. "And if it stays open, everything dies." "Everything," echoed Admiral Rourke, who was still on his knees, staring at the vortex with wide eyes. His calm demeanor was gone, replaced by unmasked terror. "You brought this here," he said, his voice trembling as he looked at Jace and Nyssa. "You." "Save your breath," Jace snapped, hauling Rourke to his feet. "You're the one who triggered it." The soldiers around them were frozen, their weapons slack in their hands as they stared at the vortex. The hum was growing louder now, a deep, resonating sound that felt like it was burrowing into Jace's bones. "Snap out of it," he barked at the soldiers. "If we don't act now, none of us are walking out of here." One of the soldiers, a young woman with trembling hands, finally found her voice. What do we do?" Nyssa stepped forward, her blade glowing faintly in the eerie light. "We fight, together." The word hung in the air, almost absurd in its simplicity. Humans and aliens had spent decades trying to destroy each other. Now she was asking for unity. "Fight what?" Rourke asked, his voice shaking. "There's nothing here but—" A shrill, inhuman scream cut through the air, silencing him. From the edges of the vortex, shapes began to emerge. At first, they were just shadows, writhing and twisting, but as they stepped into the light, their forms solidified. They were tall, skeletal creatures, their bodies covered in jagged, obsidian-like armor. Their eyes burned with a cold, white fire. Jace raised his rifle, his mouth dry. "Those things, they're not from here." "No," Nyssa said softly. "They're from beyond." The first of the creatures lunged forward, faster than Jace anticipated. He fired, the plasma bolt striking it square in the chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. It let out another unearthly scream, and more poured through the vortex. "Form up," Jace shouted to the soldiers. "Hold the line." The room erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts lit up the air as the soldiers opened fire, their shots barely slowing the creatures. Nyssa moved with deadly precision, her blade slicing through the enemies with ease. For every creature they cut down, two more took its place. "They're endless," one of the soldiers shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "They're not endless," Nyssa countered, dodging a swipe from one of the creatures. "But as long as that gateway stays open, they might as well be." Jace turned to Rourke, who was cowering behind a fallen console. "You wanted the artifact so badly. Do you have any idea how to stop this?" Rourke shook his head, his face pale. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought." "You thought wrong," Jace growled, grabbing him by the collar. "Now pull yourself together, or we all die." Nissa's voice cut through the chaos. "The glyphs. They can reverse the energy flow and seal the gateway." Jace glanced at her, ducking as a creature's claw swiped above his head. "Then do it." "I can't do it alone," she shouted back. "The glyphs require synchronization. I need you." Jace hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "What do I do?" Nissa motioned to the glowing symbols on the walls. "They're like a puzzle. I'll guide you, but you have to trust me." Jace moved to the nearest set of glyphs, his rifle slung across his back. The symbols shifted and pulsed as he approached, their patterns almost hypnotic. "Follow my movements," Nissa instructed, her hands dancing over her own set of glyphs. Jace mirrored her actions, his fingers tracing the symbols as they flared to life. The energy in the room shifted, the vortex's pull growing weaker. The creatures screeched in response, their attacks becoming more frantic. "It's working," one of the soldiers shouted. "Keep them off us," Jace yelled, sweat dripping down his face as he concentrated. Nissa's voice was calm but urgent. "We're almost there. Don't stop." The final glyph flared brightly as Jace pressed his palm against it. A surge of energy raced through the room, and the vortex began to shrink, its edges collapsing inward. The creatures screamed, their forms disintegrating as the gateway sealed. When the light finally faded, the room fell silent. The vortex was gone, and the creatures with it. Jace leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "Is it over?" Nissa shook her head, her silver eyes meeting his. "This was just the beginning. They'll come again." Rourke, pale and trembling, stepped forward. "You too. You knew this would happen." Nissa's gaze hardened. "We knew the risk, and now so do you." Jace looked at the soldiers around him, their faces a mix of relief and fear. "If we're going to survive this, we need to work together. No more sides. No more war." Nissa extended her hand, her expression serious. "Unity or extinction. Those are the choices." Jace stared at her for a moment, then shook her hand. For the first time, it felt like more than just survival. It felt like hope. A new dawn. The battlefield was silent now, the faint glow of the sealed vortex casting long shadows across the scorched terrain. Jace Hunter stood at the center of the devastation, his rifle hanging loosely at his side. Around him, the remnants of the Galactic fleet and Nissa's alien warriors moved cautiously, their faces etched with exhaustion and wary truce. He stared at the spot where the vortex had been, his mind racing. They had survived. Barely, but at what cost? The artifact was gone, and with it, their only chance of understanding the enemy that lay beyond. Nissa approached, her movements silent, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light. She held her blade loosely now, the edge dulled from battle. "It's over," she said, her voice quiet. Jace shook his head. "Over? That was just a scouting party. You said it yourself. They'll come again." "They will," Nissa admitted, "but not today." "Today feels like a hollow victory," Jace muttered, kicking a piece of rubble. He turned to face her. "We need more than hope. We need a plan." Nissa nodded, her gaze steady. "And that plan starts with unity." Before Jace could respond, a voice broke through the tension. "Commander Hunter." Admiral Rourke stepped forward, his uniform torn and his face haggard. His usual air of authority was gone, replaced by something Jace had never thought he'd see: vulnerability. "I owe you an apology," Rourke said, his voice low. "I let ambition blind me. I thought the artifact could save humanity, but I didn't understand what I was unleashing." Jace studied the Admiral, weighing his words. Finally, he spoke. "An apology doesn't undo what happened, but if we're going to survive what's coming, we'll need every ally we can get, including you." Rourke nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll do whatever it takes." Nissa stepped closer, addressing both men. "The artifact may be gone, but its message remains. The glyphs revealed more than just warnings. They showed me glimpses of possibilities. Possibilities, Jace asked, frowning. Paths forward, Nissa explained. Tools, alliances, and strategies buried across the galaxy. If we can find them, we might stand a chance against what's coming. Rourke raised an eyebrow. And you're just now mentioning this. It's not simple, Nissa said, her tone sharp. The paths aren't clear, and the galaxy isn't exactly united. But there are places we can start. Jace folded his arms. Then let's start now. Where do we go first? Nissa hesitated, glancing at the horizon. There's a world on the edge of known space. It's ancient, older than both our civilizations. If the glyphs are right, it holds something powerful. Another weapon? Rourke asked. Nissa shook her head. No, a shield. Jace raised an eyebrow. A shield? Not in the literal sense, Nissa clarified. A force strong enough to hold back the darkness. But it's guarded by more than just time. We'll need to work together to claim it. Jace sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Unity. You keep saying that word like it's easy. It's not, Nissa admitted, but it's necessary. Rourke stepped forward, addressing the remaining soldiers and alien warriors. You've all seen what we're up against. That vortex, those creatures. They don't care who we are or what we fought over. If we don't stand together, we're finished. The crowd murmured, uncertain but listening. Jace took a deep breath, stepping beside Rourke. He's right. This isn't just about humanity or Nissa's people anymore. This is about survival. If we fight each other, we lose everything. Nissa stepped to Jace's other side, her voice calm but firm. Together, we are stronger than anything that comes for us. Alone, we're nothing. The choice is yours. For a moment, silence hung over the crowd. Then, one by one, soldiers and warriors began nodding, their faces set with determination. Jace felt a flicker of hope. All right, he said, turning to Nissa. Let's find this shield. Nissa offered him a rare smile. Let's. As the two of them began organizing their combined forces, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and secrets they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, they weren't facing it alone. And that, he thought, might just be enough. For now, above them, the sky began to clear, revealing the stars, silent witnesses to a fragile alliance that could shape the future of everything.